Hey guys, this is New Sensei. Today I'll be covering a question that was originally raised by Joe McClane from CatholicHack Traditional Archery. And the question is around the use of the index finger to keep the arrow on the bow or on the rest. And basically, many people who shoot bow and arrow will use their index finger to keep the arrow steady and then pull it back to full draw and then let it go. This is particularly well known in a poster with Jennifer Lawrence in the Hunger Games, where she's literally pointing at the towards the camera, their fingers curled right around the arrow, and it's coming back all the way like this. And that's giving a lot of people a few shakes. So yeah, the question is this actually a good thing? Is using the finger bad form, and what are the problems associated with this method? Firstly, why do people do it? It's mostly because you want to keep the arrow from falling off. A lot of people, especially those starting out, will find that when they pull the bow back, the arrow comes off like this. So that can be very frustrating and dangerous. So the natural thing that people do is to keep the arrow in place, pull it back, and there you go, you're fine. That's why people do it. And for that extent, that's okay. The question is, however, is it needed? Firstly, there is a safety consideration. This is especially true if you're using short arrows. What some people might find is if they keep the finger on the arrow all the way through, you might find that you actually begin to touch the tip of the arrow. And if you overdraw and you let go, you might actually shoot through your own finger. This may sound a little ridiculous, but it has happened. I've heard it happen from one compound shooter who was fixing his arrow off his blade rest, and he punched the trigger and shot through his finger, clean through. Nice bullet hole pattern, so obviously the tune was good. But there is a safety thing. Now, for people who use extra long arrows, then that's not going to be a problem, obviously. However, I'm not thinking about the experienced shooters who have long arrows. I'm thinking more of the new people, the beginners, the first timers who we actually teach. And sometimes they get long arrows, sometimes they get short arrows. And I'll say this, club arrows tend to be short because they always hit things, they always have to be cut down to be reused. So many club arrows tend to be on the shorter side. And a lot of people, clubs are adults who have longer arms, so this might be pushing the safety part a bit there, but that is one consideration. This doesn't apply to most archers, but for learners this may be true. So that's one point against using the finger to keep the arrow on the rest. The second thing I'd like to point out is that the use of the index finger to keep the arrow on the rest can mask the source of the problem. A lot of people will be practical minded and they'll just use the finger to keep it on, or they'll cant the bow, and that's fine. But the actual cause will still be there if you're not paying attention. The reason why the arrow tends to come off the rest is because of incorrect string hand tension. The correct tension, which is what people are taught at an archery club, and what many experienced shooters do naturally without thinking about it, is to keep the back of the hand flat throughout the process. So as we draw the string back, the back of my string hand is flat, and when I pull it back, the arrow stays in place. And I'm using a perfectly straight alignment here, the Olympic style. You can see I have no problem in keeping the arrow on the rest. That is the effect of using the correct tension line in your hand. I can cant the bow for the same effect there. So that's actually not a problem if you do it correctly. What happens with many new shooters and inexperienced shooters is that there are a couple of things. Firstly, they tend to pinch the knot between their fingers, so they kind of clamp down during the draw at some point. The second thing is they tend to squeeze their hand inwards like this, start forming knuckles like that. So what happens is, when you draw it back, you start seeing that the arrow comes off. That can be very frustrating for new archers who keep on experiencing this phenomenon and don't know why. And it's just over and over again. So naturally, you hold the arrow in place, you pull it back, and there you go, you're done. Interestingly, keeping the arrow in place with the finger kind of circumvents that problem, because for many people, by the time they reach full draw, then they've actually solved that problem. The hand comes back in the anchor point and it's perfectly flat, because to hold the bow at full draw at maximum tension, you kind of have to do that, so that's a natural part of the process. It doesn't mean that you have solved your problem. You've just basically avoided the part which causes the problem. The issue there is that if you actually still have that natural squeeze of the drawing hand, it's still going to make for a poor release, and that's something which will frustrate you even if this part doesn't. Is it bad form? No, it's not even part of the shot process. You can shoot fine if you do so. It's mostly a habit people have, but it doesn't affect the shot itself. My point, however, is that as a club instructor, I'm supposed to teach people the safe and correct form. I know some people, and Joe mentioned this in this video, start off with the finger and say just keep it there, or use a straight finger and just maybe take it off before you shoot. If I see that at my club as an instructor, I just tell them to keep the finger off the wrist. There's no need to do so. And it kind of, for a learner who's very nervous, it kind of reinforces a nervous habit which can affect their actual shooting. So we tell them, look, finger off the arrow, and if they struggle with the arrow coming off the wrist, then that's where we teach them to focus on using the correct string hand placement. So it's largely unnecessary. That's really the entire point here. Is it bad form? No. But is it necessary? No. You don't need to keep the finger on the shaft to make sure the arrow stays on. And again, I can demonstrate. If I keep it on there, I can pull it through, that's not a problem. But if I take it off, I'll pull it back, that stays on. If you do it correctly, then that's not ever going to be a problem. There is, however, a practical reason behind this. For most people in the field, you might already have the arrow knocked and you're moving around, you might be stalking something, or you might be just, casually standing by and talking with your mates, or, doing whatever you do in the field, and it just happened to be there. And of course, if you don't hold on to the arrow, it just falls off, right? So this actually makes practical sense. If you're not actually actively using your bow, but you already have it knocked, then you need to keep it in place. That makes sense. And when you do acquire a target and you start the shot process, that's when you take it off and you do your shot. That makes sense as well. For that reason, that's why I think it's not a bad thing. It's just a habit people have, and for most cases, it's practical. You need to do it to make sure the arrow doesn't flop off and you're not using your bow. When you are using your bow, that's when you can take it off, and that's what most people do. Now, keeping that in mind, because it's purely a practical thing, then there's nothing wrong with that. You don't have to teach people that, because it's just natural to just put your finger there, and then when you shoot, you take it off. That makes sense. That's not even the issue here. The issue is when you teach people to do so to begin the shot, because again, that bypasses good shooting form. It bypasses the problem. You can still do so fine, but like I said before, it's seldom necessary to do so. If someone shoot well by keeping the arrow on and then taking the finger off and pulling it back, then they can do it well without the finger in the first place. That's the point. So there is a practical reason, but it's not needed for shooting well or shooting safely. Experienced shooters will do this naturally without second thought, and it's fine. However, what comes naturally isn't always the best and safest method, and sometimes, and in many activities and sports, you have to be taught to resist human instinct. And again, when we're thinking about new shooters, and when you work in a club and you deal with hundreds of new shooters and beginners, you see a large range of skill levels and experiences and habits. And we want to teach people the safest and most reliable method. Not the method which works for some people, but the method which serves as the foundation and baseline that everyone can learn from safely. It's one thing when the problem doesn't affect you, because you might have extra long arrows or you never keep your finger on the shaft. But it's different when you're teaching a group of 6 people or 12 people or 20 people, young and old, and some of them are more keen to prove themselves than others. Some are very much influenced by pop culture. So that's when things can go wrong. So that's why we always err towards the safer method, and we try to teach good, proper form at a club. Again, individually, you can do whatever you want. If you teach somebody else one-on-one, then teach them what works. But I'm speaking purely from teaching a large number of people that some of these methods, which are natural, aren't always safe and effective. So, to summarize, is the finger on the arrow bad form? No, but it can be a bad habit. Anyway, this is New Sensei. Hope you find this interesting. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.